Back next year, instead of griping about the problems that we've had, let's start looking to the solutions that will take us back to the America we love economically and the housing market that is absolutely critical to our country. Mr. President, I yield back my time and yield to the Senator from Ohio.
Senator from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you. And I thank Senator Isaacson for his words and thank him for yielding the floor the way that he did. Mr. President, we ask a great deal from our first responders, from firefighters, from police officers to keep our neighborhoods safe from violence and drugs. We ask them to put their lives on the line, to save people from burning buildings, to track down armed criminals. We ask and they give each day, each night. That's why we can't just honor them through parades and memorials, honor them by speeches on the Senate floor, honor them by showing up at various kinds of festivals, but we honor them by the priorities we set in our federal government, in state legislatures, in Santa Fe, in Columbus, and Atlanta, in city halls, in county building, county courthouses. Earlier this year, Ohioans overwhelmingly rejected Issue 2, which would have curtailed the ability of first responders, firefighters, and police officers not just to organize and bargain collectively for their wages and their benefits, but much more broadly than that, to have them sit down and negotiate with their employers, with cities, with counties, with the state, with taxpayers, to bargain for safety equipment and adequate staffing. This was a victory for them, the defeat of Issue 2. It was a victory for hardworking men and women in Ohio. It was the only time in American history when the issue of collective bargaining was on a state ballot for a statewide vote, and voters voted more than 3/5, 61% to 39%, to preserve collective bargaining rights. Again, collective bargaining not just for themselves in terms of wages and benefits, but collective bargaining, police officers, safety vests, for firefighters, the right kind of safety equipment, for teachers, organizing and bargaining collectively at the negotiating table for class size. Way more than about them. That's why the voters of Ohio, such a resounding numbers, voted to preserve collective bargaining in what it meant to public employees and what it meant to our way of life for those who are not public employees. We must continue to fight. That's the state level. At the federal level, we must continue to fight to ensure that these brave public servants have the resources necessary to safely perform their jobs. That's because so many give the ultimate sacrifice. In the last 10 years, 47 law enforcement officials representing 35 Ohio agencies were killed while on duty. 47 law enforcement officials were killed while on duty just in a decade. According to the FBI, 48 law enforcement officials across the country were feloniously killed in the line of duty in 2009. More than 57,000 law enforcement officials were assaulted while performing their duties. This past May, during National Police Week, I attended a Greater Cleveland Police Officer Memorial Service in Huntington Park in Cleveland. During the service, I met Sarah Winfield of Marysville, Ohio. Sarah's husband, Bradley Winfield, was a deputy in the Marion County Sheriff's Department, a north central Ohio community, when he was shot and killed while on duty. But in her grief, the widow with 2 young sons to care for has become an advocate, ensuring that those who protect us are protected themselves. That's why I co-sponsored legislation introduced by Maryland Democrat Ben Cardin that would create a national blue alert system aimed at apprehending criminals who injure or kill law enforcement officials. Modeled after the Amber Alert system used to find missing children, Blue Alert would disseminate critical information about suspected criminals to other law enforcement agencies, the public, and the media. When someone has gunned down a police officer, police departments all over the region, the state, and the country need to know about it. Blue alerts would be broadcast on local media and on messaging signs, would include a detailed description of the suspect, the vehicle, and other identifying information. It would encourage state and local governments to develop additional protocols to help apprehended suspects. 11 states already have such a system, but if it's only on the state level, in that the perpetrator who killed the police officer escapes to another state that doesn't have it, it doesn't work so well. That's why Senator Cardin's National Blue Alert bill is so important. Ohio doesn't have this. I'm encouraged that the Ohio Senate recently passed a version of this law. But again, it needs to be national so that it goes across state lines. And we can obviously do that as police departments are talking to each other more than they ever have through technology. I've spoken with police chiefs from across Ohio, like my city of Lorain, Ohio, Sal Rivera, the chief there, who says a blue alert system would be a critical resource to track criminals and to protect law enforcement. It would be made possible by existing community-oriented policing services, the COPS program, funded from the Department of Justice. I remember 15, 18 years ago when the COPS program began by President Clinton and the Congress in the 1990s, which made such a difference in helping local communities, small towns, big cities, rural areas, suburbs, to be able to staff up in a better way with community police officers. It's these types of federal investments that are so critical for communities facing significant budget shortfalls. Too many communities are forced to make cutbacks in essential public services, reducing staff size, scaling back investments, and safety equipment. These choices are difficult. They're made with great reluctance. That's why federal grants like the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, so-called SAFER grants, or the Assistance for Firefighters grant, are critical to help communities hire more firefighters as well as recruit and retain first responders. The omnibus bill we're considering now will provide much-needed investment that will help communities do that. While I fought for stronger investments, it's clear every little bit helps. This is an amazing story. The Chillicothe Fire Department received a funded grant through the AFG program. It follows a SAFER grant that not only helped hire personnel, it saves lives. Fire Chief Steve Gallagher, whom I've spoken with prior to this, was off duty when he experienced a pulmonary embolism, or a blood clot to the lung. Without a grant that kept his neighborhood firehouse open, and without the medic who was hired because of the AFG grant, Chief Gallagher says he would have died. These federal investments literally helped save Chillicothe's Chief Gallagher's life. According to him, 40% of deaths among firefighters occur due to cardiac arrest. He wrote to me, "When I helped write the grant application, I knew that it would save lives, but I never imagined that one of those lives would be my own." With reduced tax revenues, with increased need of vital public services like fire and police, it's critical we help our communities carry out the most basic and life-saving duties. We can keep fire responders and firefighters and officials on the job. We can establish an alert system to warn us when criminals seek to harm law enforcement officials. These are actions, bipartisan actions, that can help communities across Ohio and throughout the nation. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Florida is recognized.
Mr. President, at the late hour, as the Senate continues to try to do its work, there is word that maybe, as the good book says, come, let us reason together. Maybe there is some movement in bringing about some consensus building so that the people's work can be done and that these issues that have kept us apart for so long can finally be resolved, maybe only for a temporary basis, but at least we would be in a situation where we did not allow the tax cuts for Social Security payments that would be such, if those tax cuts did not continue, that there would be an immediate amount more that people would have to pay out of their pocket. Maybe those will continue. It is certainly the right thing to do, those payroll tax cuts. It's also the right thing to do to keep unemployment compensation going in the time of a recession when so many people are out of work and they do not have the opportunity to get work, or what they can piece together is not enough to sustain their families. That's the right thing to do. Certainly, passing the funding bills to keep the government going past midnight tonight is clearly the right thing to do, instead of extraneous issues from holding us up, having us all wound around the axle where we can't even fund the government of the United States. So maybe some reasonable minds are coming together to start working out these issues. I certainly hope so. In the meantime, what I want to speak about is something that is even more pernicious, and that is making it harder for our people to express their constitutional right of casting a vote. We have seen a pattern in 14 states enacting new election laws that basically are a suppression of voter rights. And one of those states that is glaringly, dubiously at the top of that list as being the most severe in cutting back on people's ability to vote, to know that that vote that they have cast is going to be counted as they intended it, and in the first place, making it so that they can register to vote, that very fundamental constitutional right for Americans is being threatened through these laws in the states, including my state, of suppressing the right to vote. Now, if you look at the similarities of the laws in the 14 states, you will obviously see a pattern. But in my state of Florida, we see the most severe assault on the rights of voters of all the 14 states. The present issue is joined in a court in the District of Columbia, a suit ironically brought by the state of Florida against the Department of Justice over the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its implementation. And a part of that suit actually questions the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That's a rather brazen attempt, but I think the courts will take care of that in short order. But the very issue as brought in this new Florida elections law does a number of things to cut back on the rights of voters. In the first place, the League of Women Voters, which has been registering voters for years, has stopped its registration of voters because of the new law. Why? Because the old law, on the books for decades, said that once an organization such as the League of Women Voters registered the new voters, they had 10 days to turn that in to the respective supervisors of election in the 67 counties. The new elections law amended that to 48 hours. And they attached to that the possibility of a fine that could go up to $1,000 per person doing the registration if they did not turn the names in 48 hours. And of course, we had the two cases of two civics teachers in two different parts of the state who, being a good teacher in their government class, registering their students to vote, and did not meet the 48 hours, and the state of Florida is looking at the possibility of fining these teachers. Now, that's the height of hypocrisy. That's the height of an assault on the right of people to vote by impeding their ability to register to vote. And the intended result is there. League of Women Voters is just one organization. There are many. But it shows what has happened, that all of the registrations that would occur of people being encouraged to participate in the political system, that's not being done and won't be done until this issue is settled in the courts, and that's probably going to be late summer. And so for the period of over a year since the passing of this new law in Florida, voters will not be registered by organizations such as the League of Women Voters. Now, that's a sad commentary, but in fact, that's what's happened. That's what's happened in the state of Florida. All right. But that's not all. Let me tell you what else the law does. You remember how college students got so active for the first time in a presidential election? When the presiding officer and I were coming up through college, we were taught that public service was one of the highest callings that a person could have. We were also taught that to be a participant in our democracy was a civic responsibility. But over the years, intervening, after the Vietnam War, after a number of other circumstances, young people got turned off to politics and government. And we saw them in this past presidential election become energized once again. And they went down in the cities where they went to school, and they registered in great numbers, and then on Election Day, they turned out in great numbers. Well, you know what the state of Florida did in passing the new elections law? They changed the law that said that when that college student goes down there on Election Day to vote, and they bring out their identification to show that they are who they say they are, and they compare their driver's license, identification, and address to the voting registration in the college town, and if that driver's license, which is likely, shows their parents' address, if it's in a different county, they will not give them a ballot. They will give them a provisional ballot. And as a result, we saw in the last presidential election in Florida, half of the provisional ballots cast were not counted, Mr. President. Now, this is a blatant attempt to cut out a certain element or to make it more difficult, all under the guise that they're trying to weed out fraud. We really haven't had a lot of voter fraud in our state of Florida, and I dare say you'd find the same in the other 13 states that enacted these very repressive laws. But that's not all. The law further goes on to restrict voters' rights by cutting back on the number of days of early voting. Now, why did we have early voting? Well, you know, in our state, we went through a trauma of the presidential election of 2000, when there was so much confusion and so much whether or not the ballot was intended to be this way, and about people that were confused with the way the ballot was constructed, and it went on and on and on, and we know the high drama that ended in the Supreme Court of Bush versus Gore. Well, because of that trauma, many state legislatures decided to try to make it easier to vote. And one way to vote so there was less confusion was to allow what other states have done, let part of the voting occur before Election Day, early voting, so that you could take your time going in, that you didn't have to confine everybody that wanted to vote within a 12-hour period from 7 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night, with the long, long lines, perhaps in inclement weather, in a pouring down rainstorm or snowstorm, to inhibit people's ability to exercise their right to vote. And so legislatures across this country started enacting early voting. And in Florida, that early voting period was 2 weeks. And the 2 weeks went all the way up through the Sunday before the Tuesday election. And lo and behold, in the last presidential election, because of early voting, 40% of the electorate of Florida voted before Election Day. You certainly know that the supervisors of the election like that, because then on the election day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 60% of the vote, not 100% of the vote. And therefore, it was much more manageable, even though there was an extremely high turnout because it was in a presidential election. Well, by constricting, as the Florida law did, from 14 days to 8 days, they're limiting that ability, and they cut it back. Instead of the Sunday before the Tuesday election, the last day of the 8th day will be the Saturday before the Tuesday election. And on the basis of the experience of the last decade, Mr. President, guess who voted in record numbers on Sunday before the Tuesday election after church? Certain minority groups. In record numbers. And therefore, it is, again, an attempt at suppressing that particular vote. Now, why can't we use walking around common sense that would say that we want to help people, to facilitate people, to make it easier for them to cast their vote, make it easier for them to register to vote, and then once they've cast that vote, to do it in a manner that they know exactly what they're doing, lessen the amount of mistakes, and have the security of mind of knowing that the vote was going to be counted as they intended it. And yet we see laws have been passed in a number of states to the contrary. It is my hope, it is the hope of a lot of people across this country who care about one of the most fundamental rights of being a citizen of the United States of America, the right to vote. A right, a constitutional right that casts us in contrast to a lot of other countries on the face of planet Earth. It is my hope that as the court deliberates and renders its judgment, that the Constitution of the United States will be upheld. Mr. President, I would yield the floor, and I'd suggest the absence of... Nope, before I suggest the absence of quorum, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate recess subject to the call of the chair.
Is there objection? So ordered. The Senate stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
The U.S. Senate today trying to wrap up end-of-year business. Those issues include fiscal year 2012 federal spending, as well as extending the expiring payroll tax cut. More live Senate coverage when the gavel comes down here on C-SPAN 2.
For the past few months on C-SPAN, we've examined the political lives of the contenders.